So today is World Rhino Day, and it's dedicated to the recognition and celebration of the 5 species of rhinoceros. Just last year, there was a drastic decline in poaching incidents due to the hard lockdown, but an exponential increase has been seen, or rather has seen nearly 300 rhinos poached in the first half of this year alone. So is South Africa actually losing the battle to save the rhino, and how effective is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species in actually preventing the extinction of this animal? Let's get you some perspective now. Bring in Albi Modise. He's the head of communications at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs. And Albi, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for making time. What is interesting is that South Africa is home to about 23,000 of the 27,000 rhinos that exist in the world. That's 85% of the population. Is that a sign that we're doing well in protecting this animal?
Good morning, Ayanda, and thanks for this opportunity. I think we are the home of the rhino population globally. So we understand the fact that when we pour resources into conserving the rhino, when we work closely with the different law enforcement agencies in the fight against poaching, when we engage foreign countries to ensure that we reach the different zones of the world where rhino horns find their way to, we do all of those things because we understand the huge responsibility we sit with of making sure that the rhino population doesn't disappear on our watch.
Yeah.
We take this responsibility very seriously, yes.
Help us understand how well we're doing with all those interventions in mind now. I mean, the hard lockdown, ironically, helped protect this animal, but now that things are getting back to normal, sadly, some of those long-standing issues around this animal are also returning.
What we know is that the killing of the rhino in South Africa, it's purely driven by the demand globally. So once we understand the fact that it's a global demand, there are countries in the world where elephants are being killed for their tusks. There are other parts of the world where other species are being poached for different reasons. But because we're the home of the biggest rhino populations, inevitably, if the syndicates are looking to get the rhino horn to sell to the different black markets across the world, they will come to South Africa. And therefore, it's important for us to recognize the fact that to deal with poaching, you may put a plethora of regulations and rules and deploy the police. If you do not in any way address the issue of the market, i.e. where the rhino horns go to, you will not win the war. We've been working closely with different countries like Vietnam. We work with China, we work with Laos, we work with a whole range of countries where the rhino horns find their way to. But also we understand the fact that there are those we call consumer states, but also there are those we call transit states. And these are states where rhino horns, before they could be intercepted at the OR Tambo, they find their way to those states before they ultimately go to the destination market. So in the last year, you're correct, because of the COVID lockdown and because of the regulations that would have curbed movement between the different provinces, we saw a marked decline in the poaching activities. But that is one of the elements. The other element is that we've continued to work closely with the different law enforcement agencies. Rhino poaching has been prioritized as a serious crime. You would see that, for an example, in the last 3 years, we've seen a significant decline. Actually, in the last 5 years in poaching, I can tell you in 2015, for an example, we had about 1,175 rhino that were poached for their horns. If you compare that figure with the figure from 2019, just about 594 were poached in 2019, whereas in 2020, last year, just around 394. So over the last 5 years, we've seen significant decline in terms of poaching activities that have been carried out in South Africa, but also we've seen the courts coming to work to ensure that whenever individuals are found in possession of a rhino horn without any legal justification, they met out sentences that send strong message across the world and also across the different communities in the country. But it's important for South Africans to note that as we celebrate Rhino Day today, we also celebrate Heritage Month, and the rhino is part of our heritage as African people. We celebrate Tourism Month, and rhino is part of those species that most communities or most people and tourists come to this country to view the rhino among other species in our different national parks. So the conservation of the rhino is the conservation of our heritage, is also the protection of our tourism,
right.
But at the same time is to ensure that we continue to be the hope of the biggest population for the current generation, for future generation, and for the world.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it's something like a hard lockdown that proved in some respects to be the most effective intervention, and that's because the hard lockdown curtailed movement. What do we read into that in a context where we've been told in the past that it feels like some of these syndicates are working from within, when something like a lockdown is suggesting that it's actually perhaps intervention from outside?
Look, the lockdown stopped, for an example, international flights,
Right.
mostly. The lockdown stopped. If you had poached a rhino horn in Kruger, you would not be able to transport it to Johannesburg because the movement was restricted between provinces. But also, the movement into the national park was largely restricted. At some point, some level lockdowns, we could not even have visitors into the national park. So you would have to have a justification to be found in a national park. So that in any way disrupted the movement of the poachers, and in that particular context also helped for us to beef up our security at the national parks. But what we also know, Ayanda, is that the work that's done by the rangers is one that we need to celebrate as we observe and celebrate World Rhino Day. Rangers continue to take their positions across the country at the different national parks, at the different conservation resorts, and at the various privately owned parks where we conserve the rhino, where we continue to grow the rhino. And we need to celebrate them, and as we celebrate the law enforcement agencies who, on an ongoing basis, continue to arrest individuals either found planning to or having executed that particular destructive deed of killing the rhino. So as we work on making sure that we conserve the rhino, we realize the fact that the cooperation with the Provincial Conservation Authority, with the private rhino owners, with the police, which is more focused on proactive and integrated approach, which build on existing initiatives, which try to, in doing that, blur the distinction between the different parks. Because if you don't do that, you'll be able to win the war if you only put the resources in the national and forget the private. Because private rhino owners also have a significant role to play in conserving the rhino.
Yeah. I wonder if we can very quickly speak about the northern white rhinos, Albi. I mean, it's one of the species of the rhino that's called functionally extinct, which is essentially a term to suggest that things are really bad. Interesting that scientists have got on board to try and create ways, avenues through which they could boost this particular population. Do you have any intel of how that's going? For instance, there's like embryo developments in labs in Italy to try and ensure that essentially, this population once again can be revived. Are you aware of how well those kind of efforts are going?
No, not at this point. Not at this point. And what I can tell you, though, is that our figures are showing that much as the population has been coming under significant onslaught in the different national parks, our efforts to thwart those particular encroachment by poachers and would-be poachers has been yielding dividends. We've seen, as I'm talking to you right now, we could be looking at just 15,000 or so white rhino population, and just over 2,000 for the black rhino, in both privately owned and state-owned parks in the country.
All right. Thanks very much indeed for that update. Hopefully the awareness reaches the right places and we're able to turn the tide on this important issue. Albi Modise is the spokesperson for the department, or rather the head of communications, I beg your pardon, at the Department of Fisheries, Forestries and Environmental Affairs. Once again, thanks very much indeed.